Afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Mary Sullivan Heath, and I'm your current Ward 7 Alderman and State Representative in District 41, which includes Wards 2, 4, 5, and 7. And I'm here today with attorney Patrick Long, who is a candidate for Ward 7 as a current alderman in Ward 7. And in terms of full disclosure, I just want to let everybody know that I fully endorse Patrick. I have known him now for 2 or 3 years and have found him to be energetic. And I'm excited that he's willing to step up and run for alderman in Ward 7. I think he'll do a fabulous job. So, Patrick, I have a few questions for you today. So we don't want to rush. Take your time. Patrick, tell me about who you are and why the city of Manchester is so important to you.
So I'm an attorney and a Iraq War veteran. I'm someone who's always had an interest in and a passion for public service. Actually, my grandma kind of tricked me into that when I was growing up, because my grandfather had been a career Marine who fought in 3 wars, and starting when I was, basically just a toddler, she'd tell me stories about his military service. And initially, I was just interested because it was exciting, it was adventurous, it was something different than my day-to-day experience. But she worked in some lessons about the sacrifices that he had made and that really the whole family had made for our freedoms and why it was important to do that. So I acquired an interest in public service because of that. So then I grew up in Tennessee, went to college in Massachusetts, at Simon's Rock, which is out in the Berkshires. Got a master's degree at what at the time was Franklin Pierce Law Center. Now it's UNH Law School up in Concord, and then went to Suffolk University for law school. So during all that, I served 10 and a half years in the National Guard. 6 of those were in units out of the Canal Street Armory here in Manchester. And then I also was deployed to Kuwait and Iraq during that time. I also had the experience of serving on the finance committee of the town of Great Barrington, Massachusetts from 2007 to 2010. It's a much smaller town than Manchester with a much smaller budget. So it was about $20 million between the town and the schools, and Manchester's is almost 20 times that. But I do have that experience overseeing a budget. And I also wanted to mention that I have been active in politics as a volunteer, sometimes as a campaign staffer.
Didn't you come to Manchester to do some political work?
Yeah, so I've come up Manchester periodically since 2008 to volunteer on campaigns. So that plus my National Guard experience here. During the pandemic, I decided I was ready to buy a house, tired of renting, was living in Boston, and it was just too expensive to buy a house there. So I started looking around. Manchester was about half the price, and I was familiar with Manchester, and it was a great place to live, so I figured I'd come here.
Was there something special that enticed you, though, to the city of Manchester?
Yeah, I mean, it's a place that I knew and loved from my experience coming up here for National Guard stuff and for political stuff, and I figured I'd come back.
Well, I love Manchester. I've lived here for all of my life, and I've had different jobs in different places, but Manchester is my home and always been my home, and it's a wonderful city, and I'm thrilled that you've decided to make Manchester your home and to really want to be part of our city government. So, Patrick, can you talk about your experience as a lawyer and why you think that would be an asset for you as a city alderman?
Yeah, so there's a few things that are relevant here. So the first one, and I think this is true of any small business owner, but it's experience in managing a budget, managing payroll. I don't have any employees right now, but I did before the pandemic and during the beginning of it. And then experience, being self-directed, having to set tasks for myself and complete them without a boss looking over my shoulder. And that's especially true as an attorney, where it's usually not life and death like it is in the military sometimes. Although for some of my asylum clients, it really is life and death, whether they get to stay in the United States. And so I can't drop the ball. I have to make sure everything is done, make sure it's done right, and the buck stops with me. And then beyond that, I think being one thing that I think people don't realize about being an attorney, if you just see them on TV, pounding the table, is that there's that aspect of advocacy that you see on the TV, but there's also an aspect of advising the client, and it really teaches you to see an issue from all sides and to understand everyone's perspective, whether you agree with it or not. Because in order to advise your client accurately about the likely consequences of decisions they might be making, you have to understand what the other side is thinking. You have to understand what the judge or jury is thinking. You have to understand potentially how an employer or an immigration officer in the future might think about the resolution of the case that you've reached. So you really have to be able to look at an issue with a lot more nuance than what your stereotype of an attorney might be.
Good. Thank you very much. Do you have any stories or examples of maybe a situation where you really helped somebody and it really ultimately made a difference in their life long term, who they are and what they could possibly end up being?
Yeah, I think, well, I have a lot of those. People, getting to stay in the United States versus going to, especially a poor country, makes a big difference in someone's life. One story that I tell people just to, so you can understand how complicated the law is and how you need to understand so many pieces of it. I have a client who had a severe intellectual disability. He got arrested for distribution of marijuana. It was basically the least serious marijuana distribution offense you could think of. So he was going to the park to smoke a joint. An undercover police officer approached him, asked to buy it from him. He sold it to them, and then he got probation, which is pretty normal for a fairly minor offense, because he wasn't someone who was looking to go sell drugs. He just, passed on the joint he had to the undercover officer. And then so he went back to the Dominican Republic to visit his dying grandmother. And coming back in the border, they stopped him. And because he had that conviction, he actually was required by law to be held in jail while they were processing his case, which really didn't make a lot of sense given the severity of the crime here and his intellectual disability that led to that. But ultimately, the judge did understand that this was a one-time thing, gave him cancellation of removal, which is sort of a one-time grant of clemency. So if he commits any more crimes, he does not get any opportunity ever to stay, but he gets a second chance to remain in the United States with his family.
That's great. So ultimately, did he remain?
Yes, he did.
Because of you.
Yes.
Wonderful work. So, Pat, I know you had a career over time with Marine National Guard?
Army National Guard.
Army National Guard. And you served in some pretty scary places sometimes. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences with the National Guard and how that contribution can really add to what you can be as an alderman for the city of Manchester?
Yeah, so I think, one aspect of that is working with all kinds of different people with different perspectives. You set politics aside and focus on what you have to do the job for our national security when you're in the military. And I think it also just helped me mature a lot. So I was 18, almost 19, 18 when I joined. Pretty immature at that point, but it really taught me to take responsibility for my actions. Because in some jobs, you can make all kinds of excuses for why your performance is not what it's supposed to be. and maybe your boss will let you get away with it. Maybe they won't, but the worst that happens is you get fired. But in the military, if you don't do your job right, you or someone else can get killed. So you have to absolutely do everything right that is within your power to do right, and not make any excuses. And you just have to overcome the situations that you might be inclined to use as an excuse. And I think that was really helpful in teaching me to take responsibility and take charge and solve problems.
And also courage. I think we had a conversation one time about you had some opportunities to be in a safer environment, and you chose the different direction. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so my regular unit that I was with only went to Kuwait, but I wanted to serve in Iraq, so I volunteered to transfer to a different unit for the length of the deployment so that I could serve on a gun truck. And so I did end up going into Iraq.
That must have been quite an experience.
Yeah, it's definitely scary, but you do what you gotta do.
Courage and bravery. And fortunately, everybody came back safe and sound?
Yes, everyone in my unit did. And it's sort of, I think there are aspects of politics that people can see as scary, but I'm reminded of, there's a congressman who wrote a book about how he's never had a bad day since he left Korea after fighting in the Korean War. Because just nothing he's ever had to face in politics is as scary as what he faced as a soldier. So I think I have some of the same mindset that, bring it on.
That's a good way to kind of summarize the experiences that people run into in war, that they're so just horrendous, and hopefully we'll never have to encounter that here. I just worry about what's happening in the Ukraine, and hopefully we'll come to a peaceful close to that soon. What do you think about that? Do you think we'll end soon? And I know you're not a fortune teller. I know. That was a bad question. I'm sorry to do that to you.
All I can say is that I hope it does. I hope that Putin sees the error of his ways, and I hope the U.S. does whatever we can do to help the Ukrainian people.
I agree. So let's move now into talking a little bit about the alderman and your roles and responsibilities. So the Board of Aldermen is a policy-making legislative body for city government. How have your life experiences prepared you for that kind of a position? And describe for me what you believe the major functions will be for you as an alderman in Ward 7.
Yeah, so the major functions are making policy, overseeing the budget, and just helping the people of Ward 7 with whatever they happen to need. And so I think, my experience as an attorney is helpful because I have experience, working on behalf of clients, and it's the same, well, it's not the same, but it's similar to working on behalf of a constituent. You have to fix a problem, and it may seem like a small problem versus, the backdrop of policy, but to them, obviously it is a big problem because they wouldn't come to you if it's not. And then also, as I mentioned before, being able to see an issue from all sides. And I think also just being able to analyze an issue in depth, really get a deep understanding of it, and try to make the right decision on it. And then, having served on a town finance committee before, I do have that experience overseeing budgets and also overseeing the budget for a small business.
That's great. My experiences as an alderman, I do get lots of phone calls. And, today I spent my morning having a conversation with a woman who's concerned. She's searching for an apartment. She only has $1,000 a month to spend. There were a lot of things that we talked about, a lot of different options that we were going to try and explore. But hopefully it all will work out in the end. But when you come day to day with some of those circumstances, you see, especially in the housing situation, the trials and tribulations that an older person especially has to face trying to find a place to live in an era that an average apartment is running about $1,500 to $1,900 a month. And when you're living on Social Security, it's pretty difficult. And I think it's not only is it an ear to listen to, but also trying to figure out the various avenues. And those were things that for me, I knew a lot about the state level, about getting housing and all of that, but the real on the ground helping people directly is rewarding, also challenging at times, because there are things that sometimes we just can't do right away. And the city also has its challenges because it can only do so much, but it's not always easy. So I want to talk a little bit about Hallsville. And let me give a little background about Hallsville. Hallsville School was one of the oldest schools in Manchester and in the state. It was closed a few years ago and put into disuse. And the city put out a bid to see who would bid to take it over and give it a second use, a second life. And we had two applications. One was from Southern New Hampshire Services, and that application described the role that they would create senior apartments, which is excellent, and they would also house a program with the police department. And in addition, they would continue to allow the use of the gym, which we just thought was fabulous. And most recently, the Southern New Hampshire Services was unable to attract the amount of funding necessary. They were able to get the $4 million from the county, but unable to derive the additional $4 million from the Office of the Governor, and we were hoping that ARPA funds could be used for that purpose. So a letter was sent to the mayor explaining what was happening, and that probably we're not going to go forward with what's going on. It's a interesting situation. Right now the building is vacant, but the gym is used regularly. People play pickleball during the winter. Different student activities are taking place. The building needs a lot of fixing up, quite frankly. It needs the gym section is leaking, especially with all the rain that we just had. And you know, we worked on the block party that we had there, and we saw some of the pluses, but we also saw some of the needs that the building has. Just what are your thoughts about where we're going? What are the possibilities for a building like that? I don't know what your thoughts are, because I think in terms of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, we're back to the drawing board. You know, it's what to do. And just, I had another conversation with the Office of Youth Services, and he would love to be able to have some space in that building. You know, so all of a sudden, opportunities are opening up. But again, funding is an issue, and the COVID money isn't available anymore. So what are your thoughts, Patrick, on all of that?
Well,
That's a big question. Sorry.
I'm disappointed to hear that Southern New Hampshire Service is withdrawing. I was excited by their proposal. And first thing I'd say is it means we need to get a governor who doesn't ignore Manchester.
Agree.
But that's outside of my control. So I think we need to put it out for an RFP again, and it really, I mean, we're going to have to see what happens. I would love to see another housing proposal if someone has one. But we need to do something with it, even if it's not my first choice about what we should be doing. I am hearing concerns from some residents of the neighborhood that it's starting to become a hangout for people. There's areas of it that are dark, and you really don't know what's going on there. And we don't want it just falling into disrepair and becoming a place that's going to attract crime or other problems.
Oh, I agree, and I'm sure the neighbors are concerned about that as well. I mean, they've been fortunate in a way because they've been able to park there, especially during the winter storms. It's very useful, but it is dark, very dark at night, and I would love to see Hallsville School. I mean, it's historic. The building is a beautiful structure. My grandfather actually was a custodian in that building so many, many years ago. And, it just always holds a special place in my heart. And I think it's a special corner in Ward 7 that a lot of people, there's a lot of history, a lot of families, generational families, they their parents went there, they went there, and now their children and grandchildren are going there, went there. And children now have to walk from that area down to Jewett Street School, which is a walk. And that brings up another issue, which I actually have not mentioned to you at all. And that's the corner of Jewett and Scilly. And there's not a street light there. There's not a light. And they do have a crosswalk, and they do have crossing guards there when school's in session. But that is a tough intersection. Have you been through that at all and noticed the disarray that occurs at moments in the day?
I have, and that's actually a wider problem we have in Ward 7 because we also have Beach and Maple Streets.
Yes.
There's a lot of problems with traffic safety, so I'd love to see some more traffic calming measures, better lighting, maybe a bike lane on Maple has been proposed, although the issue with that is that we would then lose parking, so we need to come up with a solution to that. But for anyone who's interested in the traffic issues, there's actually a couple of visioning sessions coming up this Friday. One at 3:30, one at 6:30 at Central High School. So I went to the one last year. Definitely interested in hearing more proposals about what we can do to improve the area. So definitely come to those and share your thoughts.
Oh, I wish I could be there because I think that's so important. We have to go to a wedding in Maine, so we're leaving early on Friday. But Beach and Maple, specifically, we have talked about creating those two streets as one lane each, just like Alderman Stewart did in Ward 2. And I know my daughter lives on Beach Street, North Beach Street, and the difference in it being one lane is absolutely amazing. It's so much safer. Just sitting at Gill Stadium and watching the cars go down Beach and up Maple at a speed that sometimes is very fast. Baseballs are coming from the field where kids are playing baseball. Beach Street School is located right there, and the children have to cross Beach Street to get to the playground. So that whole area, it's such an important aspect. And then it goes all the way to Willow Street. So I would love to see it become one lane with a bike lane, and I think would slow it down. The city has some serious concerns about the flow of traffic because that's a heavy trafficked area, and they're afraid that at the lights they're going to back up. So I think a lot more investigating does, but I would love to talk with you after you go to those sessions on Friday and hear what people are saying, because it's a serious problem. And I think as we rethink Manchester, and we're really doing a lot around the Queen City Bridge area, that area, maybe that could become part of the conversation as well. And I think there are a lot of bike advocates are really interested in looking at Beach and Maple in a different way. That was one of the things that I never thought I would be involved in as an alderman, but it was one of the first things that I became involved in. And actually, we had an open house at Beach Street School, and we listened to the concerns of parents and their worries about their children walking there. And a lot of children, from Central High School, the kids who play football practice at Gill Stadium, so they have to walk all the way from Central to Gill Stadium. So again, with the speed and everything else that goes on, crossing those streets, it just always feels like it's dangerous. So whatever you can do as an alderman there, I would appreciate it. We're all trying to, and my work will continue until I'm finished. But I'm glad that you are part of that conversation. Any other ideas related to that? No?
Well, I also just want to mention that it's not just kids that are walking, also kids taking the bus. There are some areas where I've heard complaints that it's really not a safe place for a bus to stop, but there's not really an appropriate location at all, so they have to make do with a location that's kind of unsafe. So I think in general, improving the safety would improve the safety of all the kids that want to take the bus. And then also, we don't have MTA bus service down Maple and Beach because, again, there's no safe place
It's too
to
narrow.
stop a bus.
Yes. So that was something that I did not realize. And that came up at a meeting with Alderman Pajaro, and I'm forgetting the other gentleman's name. But for people living in that particular area, many of them do not have vehicles. Bus transportation means possibility to work or not to work. So I think that's critical if we could find some way, maybe even smaller buses, I don't know. But if we could make it one lane, that I think could make a major difference. And there's a lot of activity around that.
Yeah, and I don't know if people realize this, is Ward 7 sort of stretches from almost downtown, not quite, out into an area that's a little more suburban. But the areas closest to downtown are actually among the poorest census tracts in the cities. So definitely we need to do more for people in those areas to get transportation options and other options so they can live a full life.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's something that actually, when I ran for alderman, I did not expect to run for alderman, but when I ran for alderman and I started canvassing the whole ward, I was absolutely amazed at the different needs of different groups of people, because as you go further to the east, it's more residential and the issues are different. Then as you go down more toward the center city, you've got there are many, many, many apartment buildings. You have even the veterans apartments are there. So there's so much going on, and the difference in the needs of the people who live there. So it was really eye-opening to me, quite frankly. And the difference is Wilson Street is one of the areas that I would love to see. I don't know what we could do in that area, but you know where Green Beautiful is?
I do.
And there are those the auto shops, I think it is. And if there was some way the parking is so limited and so crowded, one car can barely get through. And if a fire truck had to get through, I don't know how they'd ever do it. So there are a lot of those concerns that come up, and I worry about constantly. But, I never quite got to figure out what would be the best avenue. Actually, for a while I was thinking, what would it be like if we made Wilson one way from Silly to Wilson, to Valley? That might be an idea too. But those are things that people don't realize how much work has to go into doing something like that. They have to be road studies. They have to check to see if it will work out or not. So it's a big learning experience that I've really enjoyed. I'm still learning, though. What to learn. So, speaking of what to learn, what will you do? Let's say it's November 9th, and you've been elected. You won. Yay. Congratulations. I hope so. And you're invited. Well, you don't really get initiated. You don't get nominated or what do you call it? Put in place officially till December. The end of December, so January 1st, really. So what's the first thing that you're going to do? How will you learn, or how will you make yourself aware about everything that you need to know and be able to do?
Well, so I've already been out in the community talking to people about their concerns. So I'm not going to have to wait until after Election Day to start learning that. I think the most frequently cited concerns are the homelessness problem and just making sure the schools have the resources they need to provide a quality education. And so, but then there's also, I'm hearing about the traffic problems you mentioned. People have concerns about taxes, and various other issues. So I think it's just talking to the people in Ward 7, getting to know their concerns, which I'm already doing. So I have started with smaller concerns I think can be fixed, which is usually DPW type stuff. I have started reporting those on C-Click Fix as I hear them. So having some interactions with city staff, just learning how that works.
Can you just talk about C-Click Fix?
Yeah, so
how that works?
C-Click Fix is an app. You can download it on your phone if you have a smartphone. You can report an issue. It's really easy. You just type in a description of the problem, where it is, and then they will take care of it if it's within their ability to do so, or at least follow up and let you know that for some reason they can't fix
That's
the
one of
issue.
the things that I found interesting. People would talk to me about what's the matter with them. This has been like this for months, but the city workers don't know that it's been like this unless somebody reports it. That's why the ability to communicate with the city to tell them when something's wrong, because we can't have eyes everywhere, and it really makes a difference. And it has been my experience that when a problem has been reported, it is usually fixed within a week to 2 weeks. So going on, you've been going door to door. What are people in Ward 7 saying?
Well, as I mentioned, I think the biggest concern is homelessness, partly out of concern for the homeless themselves, partly out of concern that they may cause issues for other people. And then there's the issue of the schools, making sure that they're providing a quality education. Those are the two biggest things I hear the most often.
So you know what I didn't even ask you? The big question, why do you want to be an alderman in Ward 7?
Well, I think I can make a difference because I do have a background that contributes a lot of skills that are helpful. Whether it's analyzing an issue, managing a budget, understanding all perspectives of it, and also just as an attorney, I've worked with a lot of clients who have mental health or substance abuse issues. And I think that's important on the homelessness issue especially, and this is why it's really the right time for me to run, because that is the biggest issue right now. That's not why all homeless people are homeless, but it is a contributing factor that puts a lot of people in that situation. And so I've learned from that sort of the balance you need to have between compassion for the situation that someone's in, it's not really their fault, but also that they do need to be held accountable and really have to learn to hold themselves accountable in order to do better. And that's what I think most substance abuse or mental health treatment programs teach people to do.
So, any other reasons why you want to be an alderman? I mean, what is specifically is driving you to join this election?
Well, I mean, I've always had a passion for public service, as I mentioned at the beginning, just from when I was growing up. And I think that, my experience lets me make a difference on these issues. And also, I think I have a better vision for the city than my opponent, who has voted against a lot of attempts to solve the homelessness crisis. So he voted against hiring a director of homelessness initiatives, voted against funding for the Waypoint shelter, voted against even a lot of his Republican colleagues in transferring money to the welfare department for emergency funding for school kids at risk of homelessness at the beginning of COVID. So those are all things I would have voted for. And I think, I don't know the solution. I don't think there's one solution to homelessness because it's a bunch of different issues. And I don't think anyone knows the solution, because if they did, we would have found it already. But one thing I think that sets me apart is the view that we really need to be trying different things and seeing what works. And if we find something that works, then we should continue it until it stops working. And if something doesn't work, then don't continue it. But we have a problem that we haven't figured out how to solve, and so you have to take a sort of experimental approach to that and see what works.
Well, it certainly seemed to be exacerbated by COVID. We saw homelessness, we saw people who were unhoused. The problem was there, but it seemed that during COVID and then right afterwards, I know that I traveled to Denver and I saw homeless people everywhere. In travels to other big cities. So it's a issue that's impacted our country, and I don't know if it's a national, international issue. I don't know, but it's why all of a sudden are there so many people unable to find homes, and additionally, it seems to be paired with drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, so I think it is a national issue. There are multiple components to this. Part of it's a housing affordability issue. So we need to get more housing built, both market rate and affordable. Market rate housing, that's really just a matter of the government staying out of the way and letting the private sector do its thing, which the city's been doing a good job at the last few years. So we have a deficit of about 3,000 housing units compared to what we need. And there's about 2,000 that are either under construction or approved and somewhere in the pipeline. But that's still going to leave another 1,000. So we need to make sure that the government, the city, continues to allow that. And then affordable housing, we need to be doing what we can to secure more funding from HUD, as the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and fully fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund so that people can build affordable housing. And then part of it is the alcohol and drug issues. Part of it's the mental health issues. On that, I'm happy that the city has the contract it has with Gatehouse. I'm happy that that was recently extended, although it was only extended for opioid users. So I'm hoping we can find the funding somewhere else to help people with alcohol problems. Right. And just in general, we need to be doing more to help people get services. So I talked to a psych nurse a little while back who has spent her entire 30-year career commuting to Massachusetts because there's not even enough facilities in New Hampshire that would hire her. So I think statewide we have an issue with underfunding mental health, and that's why we have people with acute psychological crises being boarded in hospital emergency rooms instead of a psychiatric facility. And so the other end of that I don't know if a lot of people realize is that part of the reason that the state hospital is full is because there's not enough community care and transitional housing options for people afterwards, so they can't be released from the hospital. So we need to be doing everything we can to secure funding and help people get the services that they need.
And that's really an area where the state comes in. And we saw, particularly during the time wherein we had such difficulties with the increasing number of unhoused individuals circulating around the city, that we really needed some help from the state, and we didn't get much. It's not just a City of Manchester problem, and so many of the people who were released onto the streets in Manchester, many came from the county jail, many came from a drug and alcohol abuse treatment center, and they found their way to the streets of Manchester, not living here, but no place else to go. And all of a sudden, we were in Manchester, we were somewhat overwhelmed by the nature of this problem, looking toward the state and really not getting the support. How would you work to try and garner stronger levels of support from our state government?
Well, as an attorney, I'd say the first thing you want to do is just ask nicely for what you want, and maybe the person that you're asking will give it to you. So I think whether that's realistic is going to depend a lot on who is in office. The first part of my term, if I get elected, is going to be the same people that are there now. But after the 2024 elections, maybe we'll have lawmakers who will do more for the city of Manchester, and a governor who will do more. So I asking them, and then if that doesn't work, you consider other options. Maybe there is some basis to litigate this issue. I haven't done the research, so no promises on that, because that's some complicated legal research right there. But in theory, the towns that people are coming from have responsibility for those people. But a lot of them either are not in a position to provide the funding, or they're just not doing it, or we don't have good enough information about where people are coming from to even assign responsibility. So there's a whole statewide crisis that's being dumped on Manchester. So I think we should do a better job of pursuing funding from the state or from the towns that people are coming from, either whether that's legislation or litigation, whatever it takes to get everyone else in the state to pay their fair share.
So all of this is so complicated, and New Hampshire is an aging state. Manchester is as well. However, we are housing some of the most exciting technology with Dean Kamen and Army and the work that he's doing with regenerative tissue. It is remarkable. And we are attracting young people from all over New England and beyond to come to live in Manchester. And I know that in some cases, some of these employers are developing their own housing for employees because they can't find it. What will you do to work, number one, to attract more young people? Because we are a city that's older, and we're a state that's older. We need to attract young people. We need to bring people up from Boston. We need to get them into the exciting jobs that are available here, because there are lots of them. And how can we make Manchester so exciting that people will want to be here?
So I think part of that is a housing affordability issue. I think there's a lot of people that are realizing they can't afford to live in Boston anymore, especially if they're ready to buy a house and looking at those prices like I did. Part of that, I think, is that we have to make sure that there are jobs here that will attract them. Or if they want to continue working in Massachusetts, we need to make sure there's decent transportation options. So I'd love to see the commuter rail if it's financially feasible. If it's not, I think we should at least restore in the Boston Express bus service from Manchester, which right now there's only one a day in each direction, and I take that sometimes, but it's a very limited service, and you have to drive to Londonderry to use it for the most part. So for someone that doesn't have a car, especially if they can't afford a car, they're denied that option.
So prior to COVID, the buses were running every hour, and that's not the case anymore?
That's correct. It was actually really convenient when I was in the National Guard here and lived in Boston. I always knew, like even on Sunday afternoon when I got out of my drill weekend, I would have no problem getting the bus back. But now that is not the case. There's one bus at 5:40 in the morning to Boston and a bus back here at 5:30.
That actually came up during the budget process at the state level, because they also used to have a bus that went from Nashua and Concord to New York City. And we really would like to see those back again, because I think people are ready to travel. And anybody who's been on the highway lately certainly realizes that people are definitely traveling, because we are traffic backed up, that's for sure. And to get those back again would really make a difference.
Yeah, and I think that's something that doesn't necessarily need to be taxpayer funded, because I think people would be willing to pay more for the bus tickets if they could actually get reliable service. Because even if you increase the prices, that's still cheaper than having to go to Londonderry or not even being able to get there at all.
So I'm going to shift a little bit now, and let's talk a little bit about safety. There are some concerns. We had the 4th of July that we just have gone by, and I have to say, personally, in Ward 7, usually I hear fireworks for 2 weeks around that time. And this year, we didn't hear anything, really. So that seems, and I know that the chief has been working hard to really mitigate and minimize the amount of firework action that's going on, because it's harmful for pets, it's harmful for people that have trauma. So there's that issue. And then there's the issue of the number of guns in the streets. I questioned the chief and said, where are they coming from? And often he said that people are just stealing them from cars. People leave their cars unlocked with a gun in it, and so somebody takes it. But what approach would you take, or what kind of questions would you ask about safety in relation to firearms?
Well, I really wish that gun control policy could be set municipality by municipality, because the needs of Manchester are probably different than the needs of somewhere in the North Country.
Absolutely.
And the problem is that's not realistic, because then someone could just take a gun across state line or across town lines. So we need to focus police resources on enforcing any illegal gun activity, whether that's stealing guns, whether it's bringing them in illegally. Let lawful gun owners have their guns, but also educate them, make sure that they are locking them up when they need to be secured, so that someone who's not supposed to have it can't get it.
Our state laws don't support a lot of that, unfortunately.
Well, I think they at least support education.
Yes.
I think that, I'm a fan of the shot spotter technology.
Yes.
I think that can at least make response times faster, and that can deter shootings, because people know that they're more likely to get caught. I think a lot of it is just prioritizing, going after violent crime. It's really what I think they have been moving in that direction from where they used to be. But I think that needs to be the biggest priority of police resources. And then we need to make sure that we have adequate police patrol officers, and that they have adequate equipment to do their jobs.
Well, that's a good point, because one of the issues we have in Manchester is engaging new young police officers or firefighters. How do we make Manchester a place where firefighters and police officers want to come?
So I think part of that is the same general answer of making the city more desirable for everyone to live in, and for young people especially who are starting their careers. Part of that is we have to make sure that we're paying them enough, that we're giving them the tools they need to do their jobs. And then, we need to try to eliminate some of the problems that I think are causing some burnout and some frustrations in the job. And short term, I don't know that we can do that, but longer term, maybe we can. So one complaint I've heard from firefighters, for example, is just how much of their time is spent dealing with overdoses. And I mean, the reality is that is what the job has to be right now. But if we can get the drug problem under control, get people into treatment so that they're not overdosing in the first place, then that should reduce the amount of time that firefighters are spending on that. And I think similarly, a lot of police time goes to dealing with homeless encampments and those sorts of issues, that if we can get people off the streets, then they won't have to spend their time on that anymore.
Absolutely, that's true. And hopefully we can attract more younger people who'd be willing to come to our city. Now let's moving on to education. So near and dear to my heart, I'm a long-time educator. I actually worked in the Manchester School District for 26 years. I still interact on many levels, and worked hard as one of the founding members for Manchester Proud many, many years ago. Number one, we have an issue with attracting educators to our city. And two, there's an issue of the way people look at our Manchester schools and their attitude toward them. What can we do to attract educators to the city of Manchester? And how can we really elevate the work that's done every day? Often we think about New Hampshire's a very different state. Schools look very different in different parts of the state. Now, if I'm an educator in Hanover, children are coming to me with a lot more skills than, let's say, a child in Manchester is coming to me with, for various reasons. So we're at a different place often. We have a high percentage of children that have free and reduced lunch meals. That means we have higher levels of young families living in poverty, which means that comes with a myriad of problems. So, how do we really build the reputation, give credence to the work that people are doing? I mean, I have 5 grandchildren, and my 2 children all graduated. My children graduated from Memorial High School. My 5 grandchildren graduated from Central High School, and they have all done extremely well. They've all gone on to post-secondary education and are doing very, very well. Um, how do we get that fact across? And as a matter of fact, Central High School is sending more children to high level colleges than many other schools in the state. I mean, we have numbers going to Harvard, Yale, any number of schools. And I don't know if it's a matter of getting the word out, or just people seem to look and it's like, oh, Manchester. How do we change that perception?
So as far as attracting more teachers, first thing is we got to pay them enough. So we currently pay them less than the state average. It was about $1,000 less. In the latest contract, it's about $600 less. So we should at least bring them up to the average. We have historically been neglected by the state in education funding, and that's improved, at least in the current budget.
And we have 2 lawsuits coming out that may help a lot more, we hope.
Yes. So first thing is going after that state money, making sure we're not being neglected, and then we'll see where we're at that point. And then raising the reputation of the schools. I think the schools are being blamed for a lot of things that really are the result of poverty, of kids having disabilities, or being speaking English as a second language. So we just need to address those issues better. One thing, so this is something that needs to be fixed at the state level, which they unfortunately did not fix this year, is Medicaid automatic enrollment for
direct
kids
certification. I know.
Who have free and reduced lunches. So those are the kids who need the most help usually, as they have the worst circumstances to overcome.
And it would have made a significant difference.
So we need to make sure that we're addressing the needs of the kids who have the most serious needs, and I think that would pull up the entire district.
And a shout out to our school board member, Sean Parr, who actively testified every single time Medicare direct certification came up. And we got it almost through. We got it through the House. We got it through the Senate until the end, and then they pulled it out because, sadly enough, they recognize that the number of children living in poverty is much higher than they anticipated, and it would have increased the adequacy amount significantly. And I think that right there is a loud shouting message that we need to look at hard, especially in a year where New Hampshire had the highest revenues we've ever seen before. But I go on, and now I need you to talk about things you want to say to Ward 7 voters so they can see firsthand why you will make a good alderman and you will represent them well. I'm going to give you the next 7 minutes that we have so you can talk to people about why you'll be a good alderman and why you care about this and how you'll carry the torch for our city.
All right, so I'm always out in the community talking to voters. Answer your door if I knock on your door, or you can come to events like the Maple and Beach Street visiting sessions I mentioned. Anything like that, I usually show up at. If you want to learn more in general about my campaign or about me, you can go to www.votepatricklong.com. And my contact information is on there. You can reach out with any questions that you have. I think it all goes back to, again, I have dedication to public service I've always had. And I think that the life experiences that I've had as an attorney, serving in the military, and owning a small business, helping oversee a municipal budget before. Those are all things that contribute to my ability to resolve the issues that the city's facing right now. I think the biggest issues are the homelessness crisis and making sure our schools have what they need, and do everything I can to resolve those issues.
So how will you juggle all your legal responsibilities? You have a big job. And and Aldermanic takes time. I mean, I know how much time I spend every day being an alderman. How will you manage all that with your time?
Probably going to have to hire a paralegal again. I think that is something. I mean, I've always had multiple responsibilities to juggle. I was in the National Guard while I was in school. I actually got deployed in the middle of law school.
Oh, that must have been hard.
Well, it was actually kind of convenient because then I got the GI Bill when I came back at a much higher rate than I had it as just a Guard member. So I went from being like one of the poorest students in my class to one of the better off students because of that money. But I've always had to juggle multiple responsibilities, and even just being an attorney, there's always that aspect of having to juggle multiple cases. You can take fewer cases, but then you make less money. So how do you deal with that? I've learned to prioritize, and some nights I just don't sleep a lot because there's a lot that's got to get done. But I think I have experience juggling multiple responsibilities, and I can always hire a paralegal at my law firm if I need extra help juggling everything.
So Pat, let's say it's 5 years from now, and you've been elected alderman twice. Tell me, what will be different in Manchester because of you?
I think that there will be fewer homeless people on the streets, and they will have the people that need help with a mental health or a substance issue will have gotten that help, and the people that are struggling because of the cost of living will have found a place that they can afford to live. I don't think we'll be 100% there yet, but we can make some progress definitely in 5 years, and schools will be fully funded. Our teachers will be paid enough to actually attract quality teachers, continue to do that, and all of our our police and firefighters as well will be paid enough to attract them. They'll have the equipment they need, and hopefully their job conditions will have improved somewhat as we improve the homelessness problem.
So the primary is on September 19th at St. Anthony's School, and we hope that you all get out to vote if you live in Ward 7 especially. And the general election will be November 7th, and we're really looking forward to some good results that day. Again, the polls open at 6 and close at 7, and we would love to see you at the polls. And Pat Long is a wonderful Attorney Patrick Long. May be a little bit confusing to have two Pat Longs, but it'll be fun. I'm sure the mayor will have a great time with that. But it would be wonderful, Patrick, to have you on the board. And I certainly know how much I love my experiences there. And I hope that you will take my place to be the next alderman in Ward 7. Any other parting comments for us? We have 2 minutes left.
Well, I think a lot of people get a kick out of it when I introduce myself as the other Pat Long, and sometimes I do that to avoid the confusion. So just remember that I'm the other Pat Long, not the one that you may be familiar with, who's the current Ward 3 alderman.
Oh, that's great. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. And I hope you reflect upon what we talked about today and think about Patrick and his qualifications, his excellent qualifications for alderman in the city of Manchester. And again, our primary will be coming up on September September 19th, and November 7th we'll be voting in the general election. And please make every effort to get out to vote. We have a lot going on and a lot of big decisions to make. Sometimes when it's an off year, a municipal year and not a state election year, people don't always get to the polls. But I want to thank you for being here today, Pat. I appreciate, and I just want to thank the network here for having us and allowing us to be here today. So thank you, everyone.